Welcome to Flow with Arman Assadi. All right, we got a very different one for you today. I have my old friend from my San Francisco days, Ketan Anjaria, in the house. Ketan is the founder and CEO of Hire Club. You can check them out at hireclub.com. It's an amazing company and group and community that helps people get the job of their dreams. They provide coaching, and it's also great for founders and entrepreneurs like me who are looking for, the top talent out there. There's an amazing Facebook group that I've been a part of since I think the very beginning years ago. I've hired multiple people from that group. You should absolutely check it out. It's a great group to join. I think Ketan said there's 33,000 people in the Facebook group now. But this conversation today really sprouted because in that group, I see a lot of things that I don't always agree with. Now, I used to agree with pretty much everything that everybody in San Francisco ever said. But I think that due to just time, experience, and changing my opinion on a lot of things by being exposed to new things, by being exposed to certain philosophical thinkers, and by actually leaving the belly of the beast, as you might say, when it comes to that type of thinking, I was able to look at things differently. And I've watched repeatedly certain things be posted in the group that are more cultural, more about racism, more about a lot of the hot topics that are going on today. And I couldn't help but reach out to Ketan and say, and he holds a lot of these beliefs, and I couldn't help but reach out and say, hey, jump on the podcast. Let's have a bit of a discussion. Now that discussion turned into a debate, I would say, but we stayed sane and it was respectful. But there are some really great moments in here where we really go into it, and we talk about race, we talk about sexism, we talk about police brutality, politics, Trump, and I recorded this November 5th, 2 days after the election. So at the time of this recording, you should know who the president is of the United States. I hope. We'll see. But right now, as of the time of this recording, we don't know. And it's currently being contested. So we got into it. We got into a lot of stuff, and I'm really grateful for Ketan to jump on. But my opinion has changed, guys. I've learned a lot. I think differently, and a lot of what's going on in San Francisco and in California, in my opinion, is a form of group thinking. And I think a lot of people are not sitting down and really processing what the other side is thinking and how those beliefs are originated. And that's a lot of where this discussion went, is me playing, I'm a moderate. If you were going to put me somewhere on the political compass, I'm a moderate. And you can check out Political Compass, by the way. Just Google that. It's great to see where you're actually at. I'm a libertarian leaning moderate, meaning economically moderate, but in terms of my social beliefs, more libertarian, more individual. And a lot of these beliefs are counter to what Ketan and people in places like Silicon Valley and San Francisco believe. And culture's changing, and it's a radical time. So this was a really juicy conversation, and I hope you enjoy. Before we jump into that, make sure a few keynotes. Number one, make sure you're following me on Instagram. I want to be friends there at Arman Assadi. And send me a DM and let me know what you think of the episode. Number two, armanassadi.com for the show notes and everything you need. Make sure to sign up for my Flow Friday newsletter and take the brain type assessment right at the top of the website. That'll get you on the newsletter. And third, you can also text me directly your thoughts. And I have a little gift I've put together, my Flow Kit, which is a huge PDF of all of my favorite tools and resources and books, everything, electronics. If you want access to that, just send me a text, #FlowKit to 619-825-2595. That's it for announcements, right? Oh yeah, make sure you're subscribed to the show. Don't be lazy. On Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Flow with Arman Assadi. Subscribe. All right, without further ado, let's do it. My conversation with Ketan. Ketan, my brother, thank you for making time, man. I know you got a million things going on, and we find ourselves at a very interesting time, actually. So why don't we just start right there? You and I are talking right now, November 5th, 2020, 2 days after Election Day. And how do you feel?
Oh, man, I have not been sleeping. I'm like refreshing CNN every 10 minutes. It's very stressful. We all are pulling for a Biden win, and seeing how close it is, seeing that there's 60 million people who are like, yeah, I want 4 more years of this, which
Mm-hmm.
is like that doesn't make any sense to me in any shape or form. So yeah, it's been tough, but at the same time, I was talking to some friends, when I founded my company Hire Club in 2017, a year after Trump went into office, and I realized
Mm-hmm.
that even though there's a president that I don't agree with, my life still has to carry on. I still
Yeah.
have to find ways to succeed and thrive, regardless of who's in office. Even though there's a lot of things that are happening politically, they're damaging a lot of people's lives, but I still have to find a way to carry on. So I'm trying to have that perspective at the same time being excited for a Biden win.
Are you mentally preparing for the opposite scenario where, I mean, in your perspective, sounds like it would be pretty heartbreaking if Trump
I'm looking at
somehow.
flights to Mexico. Yeah, I'm
Uh-huh.
I'm looking at an escape plan. In fact, I've been talking to some people about, I've been in San Francisco in the U.S. 17 plus years, and there's a big change in the last 4 years. We know this,
Mm-hmm.
and people have been hit really hard, and some things don't feel safe anymore.
Hmm.
Does it feel like the America they used to feel? Like we talked about, make America great again. For a lot of people, America is not great right now, and it hasn't been. And so I have to ask myself, is it great for me? Is it great for my family? Yeah. So like, I think before the election, I was definitely thinking about, do I want to leave the country? I know we've had a few friends that have left the country and recently seem like they're really loving life and they're not stressed out about the craziness that I think America sometimes lives within.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very true. Yeah. Canada's already putting up their wall. That meme is already happening.
Damn it. Damn
Every
it.
4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. They
Hopefully
love
we'll
to say
find
that.
some place to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about this safety aspect you just mentioned. When you say it hasn't been a safe, in what way do you think you've seen that around you and or personally experienced it even?
Well, I think leaders set the tone for their community, right? And I have a community in Higher Club where I set a tone, and then obviously the president has a community of the United States where he sets a tone. And if you look at the fear being created by, oh, these people are out to get you, someone's coming for your monies, these liberals or whatever are trying to attack you. Um, Even like the caravans you talked about years ago. A few years ago, there was
Mm.
all this fear about caravans. Where do they go? All right. And there's a lot of fear mongering created by someone's out to get you. And I think that there's actually been a lot of research talking about anxiety and therapy, and the level of anxiety and therapy has grown tremendously. And obviously, Corona makes that even worse,
Oh yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the fear comes from two places. So one, there's the actual emotional fear of, do we have someone who's stable in leadership? Do we have both an economy and a social safety net that feels safe for people? Do we have healthcare that feels safe for people? And obviously with Corona, a lot of people don't feel safe, right? um, I was talking to someone who lives in New Zealand last night, and
Hmm.
she was saying, I don't wear a mask because we stopped it happening,
Yeah.
and we're very dead serious about it. So when there is an outbreak, we shut down everything completely. And so she wasn't fearful anymore because they handled it. It's like, if you don't handle the symptom early on, it gets worse, right?
But these are people that listen to their government,
Exactly. And they listen to their scientists,
They listen,
right?
yeah, they listen to their leadership. And we saw the same thing in Sweden. Whatever the Swedish government tells people to do, there's generally a disposition to trust. And that
Exactly.
is built into the culture, to trust that this group of elected officials is going to do what's best for everybody. One example, my Swedish friends told me is like they had to take into account that if people had to stay home, child abuse rates might go up.
Oh, wow.
Every little aspect
Yeah.
that being one example gets taken into account to then make the best decision for the collective. And a lot of people didn't agree with the way Sweden did things. But one of the challenges, man, is like there's like 9 million people in Sweden and like, I don't know, 4 million people in all of New Zealand. And we're
Right.
talking about 300, I don't even know what it is today, 335 million people, something like that.
Yeah.
That is challenging. And you're talking about a huge melting pot of religions, cultures, ideologies. And as everybody loves to say, America's been more divided than ever before. So I guess it's like, is that actually a doable possible solution where if the government had just told us what to do, we would have done it and we would have gotten through this?
I think it is because everyone talks about, oh, the U.S. is a bigger population, it's a different country. If you look at the EU as a whole
Hmm.
and look at that as a version of America, right, with the individual countries being their own states, America is very similar in that sense, right?
Hmm.
States can be very different. The language spoken in Georgia is very different than the language spoken in California, even though we share a lot of the same things. And because of we share borders because we're states, the EU shares borders because of that. And so I think it is possible, right? Across the EU, you saw a really connected and well thought out response. Some countries at the beginning were having really hit hard. For the most part, most people were on point and listening to their scientists. In America, there are things that we do culturally. Like, put it this way, we all stopped basketball and football and baseball games, something that we would never have thought of as a
Hmm.
culture,
Hmm.
right? We
Hmm.
stopped all of that. Everyone started wearing masks for the most part, right? A
Yeah.
large portion of people did it. And so I don't believe that the most wealthiest country in the world, the country with the most resources, cannot enact immediate wonderful change. I don't believe that. I've seen it happen. We see it happen all the time, right? In fact, we're seeing it happen with this election, right? And so I think it is possible. The problem is if you don't have a consistent voice from your leadership,
Yeah.
right?
I really don't know, man. I think it's possible if you believe that that's what's best. And generally, the people that believe that that's what is best and desired are left leaning and are okay with the idea of the mask. But in America, you have these extremes where people truly feel like I talk to our international friends and they're like, you guys, you couldn't have ever been told to wear a mask and it must be worn for this long in this environment in these places because people see that as an exchange of liberty for safety and that they don't trust that the safety rules that are being laid out are in their best interest. They would rather retain their individual liberty. And we see very heavy libertarian views in America that I don't think any other country in the world has,
So there is this like
which is tied to the
guy,
trauma of the country, I think, too, by the way.
there's this guy which is like, is what the state you're living in, a fascist state, and there's like 14 elements to it. And if you look at what's been happening in America lately with Trump in power, so many of those things of having a fascist regime is coming into place. And the first one is mistrusting science and media, right?
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
if someone becomes like dear leader, which to a lot of people who support Trump, he can do no wrong. We know this, right? Right? He left his supporters out in the cold recently at a rally this weekend.
Yeah.
Thousands of people were left out in the cold, right, on a freezing night, but no one blamed him, even though it clearly was his fault, right? And so I think the problem that happens is when you get in a situation. I was reading a great article talking about how being a Trump supporter is like being in an abusive relationship, right? And so I think what happens with not having this consistent support is that there's people
But is that
who's
written by a Trump supporter?
well, I think what happens is people
That'd be
are
pretty interesting.
people are really scared, right? For lots
Hmm.
of reasons. Like there's economies and communities that have been hit hard for lots of reasons, whether it's climate change or lack of traditional coal power moving away, or just industries changing and companies taking work overseas, right? Labor overseas, and they're scared. And what a fascist does is come in and bruise that fear and says,
Hmm.
I'm going to
Hmm.
fix you. I'm going to be the one that's going to take care of you. So you learn to listen to that instead of what your voice tells you, right? There's a long, set of tweets where it's like, where the Trump voters who changed their mind, who are
Hmm.
like, whoops, I got swindled, you
Hmm.
know? And they
Hmm.
all talk about this. They're like, wow, I really thought he was going to do what I said he was. Like he talked about draining the swamp. It's the most corrupt presidency has ever been. There's
Hmm.
been more indictments in this presidency than any other presidency in history, right? So I think what happens is that people want something to believe in,
Hmm.
and if your leader makes it that you can only believe in him, then you lose faith in science and you lose faith in your community, because now it's at the point where, yeah, you're right. You know, people treat each other on the other side as an enemy, right? We view fellow Americans as enemies versus fellow
Yeah,
Americans, right?
for
Which is
sure.
scary. That's scary, you know?
For sure. You're absolutely right. There are so many factors that are very demagogue like and just unfortunately, the character of this man, there's not a lot that anybody, even a supporter, a diehard supporter, can defend about that. And some supporters do it jokingly, where
Right.
it's like, a sense of support regardless. But if you really sit down with the individual, it often doesn't come down to I agree with every aspect of what this political party says or what this person says. It's one or two key issues. I mean, do you know how
Right.
many? I was talking to a friend about this. Do you know how many churches, for example, and when you look at churches, churches are a community
Right.
similar to what you started with, and in that community, there's a form of leadership, and the leadership might have a say or a recommendation. And often, unfortunately, one of the shortcomings of community is that there's a propensity for group thinking, and that can be
Mm-hmm.
good, that can be bad. And in this
Mm-hmm.
situation, and say a lot of these churches, there is a recommendation that we are Trump supporters. And the reason we are Trump supporters is because of one issue, abortion.
Right.
Okay, so let's look at that. This person is saying that because of Trump's position on abortion, we're going to look past everything else.
Right.
Now that makes sense. It's like, okay, they've made that decision. They're doing it to the best of their ability, and they're only being given two options. Their option is the pro life or the anti, in their opinion. And that's the way they see it. And when we look at somebody like that, we assume that, or rather, I think the way to put it is kind of what you said, is like, I just don't understand them. I don't understand how somebody could give their support and their vote and their admiration, even oftentimes, to somebody who is so uh, uh, against the liberties and the values and the morality that I would like to see in the world and what this person represents. I think we have a huge issue with separating character from policy. And that is
Mm-hmm.
a very challenging thing for both sides. I heard you, in the beginning you said, it's like, I just, not only do I not get it, but I guess my question is like, is it possible for people to separate those two things, and or is it wrong to do so? Do you see them as so closely intertwined that they should not be allowed to look at separately?
Well, if you're talking about the issue with this character versus policy, right? Policy comes from community charactership, right? What kind of community do you want to live in, right? Those policies are the legal enactments of that process. So, for example, we decided as a country 30, 40 years ago, whenever Roe versus Wade was, that we thought abortion was legal. We had a Supreme Court case about it. We knew that it made women safer. We knew that it made kids safer. We knew that it made families safer. But yet, even with all this data showing that having abortion legal is actually safer, because here's the issue with abortion: if you make abortion illegal, it does not mean abortion goes away. It means
Mm-hmm.
it just gets more dangerous. People do
Correct.
things in back alleys. People do things in harmful ways, and young women oftenly, when young women of color, are often disproportionately affected by it. So it's not. I think the problem is when you have the religious right and you have about Christians who are single issue voters,
Mm-hmm.
with abortion being the issue. There's much more important than one issue than
Mm-hmm.
in any election, right? In any kind of political sphere, right? Abortion is one issue. And the reality is, with these quote unquote pro life people, they only care about unborn life. Once that life is born, they're not looking at welfare for that life. They're not looking at healthcare for that life. America has actually gone down in infant mortality. Sorry, what did I say? Going down. We've
Mm-hmm.
worsened our infant mortality in the last few years. Our life expectancy has gone down. So, what sense does it make to say, I want a baby to be born in a world where they're not going to be safe?
I can't speak for that person, but I don't think that they're saying that they don't care how that person's life turns out, or rather that they don't want to support the welfare of that person. I think that is what they're saying. They don't want to be the one to support the welfare of that person through the government intervention. I think that the right is generally saying that we are more individualistic and that there is a pursuit of happiness that each individual has the right to. And I
Right.
think that there's a lot of talk about equality of opportunity, and I'd love to get into some of the equality of outcome stuff that you see in the workplace. That's like a little
Yeah.
footnote for me later.
Yeah.
But there's this that's kind of the foundation of the ideology. It's you have all the rights that I have. I just don't want the government to intervene and put their hand in my pocket, because that form of greed should go two ways. It's like there's a famous quote by Thomas Sowell where it's like, I've never understood how greed only goes one way. It's greedy to want more money versus is it greedy to take my money away? And I think we have to look at that both ways sometimes.
So I think there's a saying I really like: look at what they do, not what they say. The right and often libertarians love to say that we support individualism, we support people taking care of themselves. If you look at the financial records of the last 30 years of government, the Republican Party always increases the deficit. It always has worse spending, and often what we call welfare, they're okay with corporate welfare. They're okay with giving billions and trillions to companies, but like we see right now with the pandemic, right? We gave a
Yeah.
$1,200 check
Yeah,
one
but
time.
Biden's going to do the same thing. He's going to pump the shit out of the government and stimulate the economy.
That's a different issue, but and we can get into it later. But what I'm trying to say is that like you can say you support lack. I mean, abortion is a perfect example.
Yeah.
If they're actually saying we don't want government in our business, then they should support their women's right to choose, because
Hmm.
that's government being in the most personal business there is, right?
Yes.
Right. So like I think there's
Yes.
a lot of hypocritical thought process in that thinking of that we want to have the government not have control over us, but at the same time we're going to tell women what to do with their bodies. We're going to tell brown people how they can live their lives. We're going to tell black people how they're going to be safe in their neighborhoods. When what we're doing is saying, I want control when I think control is right for me. Right. And it
Hmm.
becomes what matters for me rather than what becomes matters for other people. Right. And this is something I remember reading a great comment on Reddit about it. You know, why is there thinking in the certain parts of America where they're not taking care of each other, right? Where it's like in this individualistic thing. First of all, I think we can't underestimate the power of infiltration and the power of other organizations and governments around the world coming into America and saying, we want to fuck it up, right? This is documented things that's happening right now. On our own personal website, we had 100,000 Russian accounts sign up. I have nothing to do with politics. Like, what's going on with that, right?
That's funny.
And so I think there is a concerted effort. What used to be the Cold War is now the information war, and we have lost tremendously. You look at Twitter, you look at Instagram, you look at Facebook. The top 10 pages on Facebook every single day are conservative pages. And what ends up happening is some of those
Sure.
conservative pages are funded by Russian propaganda organizations. This is nothing that like I'm talking about some conspiracy theory. The
Like which
FBI has
one?
found these people, right? There was, and some of them they're also doing it on the left side too. They'll come in and put in left wing kind of tweets and articles to say we support the left wing as well, and basically trying to stir shit up,
You're
right?
saying that these governments are actually being manipulated, or that I'm sorry, these companies are actually being manipulated, these media outlets, or that they're
100%.
literally executives at the company funding it,
No,
and
no,
there's a
there's
bias.
there's two parts. There's one, there is I think information warfare happening from China, happening from North Korea, happening from Russia,
Right.
happening from other organizations. You can't do a regular war with America. America cannot be taken by coming to our shores with guns. It can't. We're too big. We have the best military in the world, right? We have terrible information warfare protection, right? The
Yeah.
2016 election
Yeah. It
was
was proof of
skewed
that. Yeah.
was skewed because of election interference. 2020, God knows how much that's happening, right?
Yeah.
And this is not like me just saying this. The FBI is saying this.
Sure.
CIA is saying this. This is a well-researched thing that's happening. The Social Dilemma talks about it. I think what
Yep.
happens with the companies is that we have this sacred thing called freedom of speech, and
Hmm.
we think freedom of speech is something that can never be changed. But the reality is, you legally can't yell fire in a movie theater, right? There are limitations to every right, right?
Hmm.
If you're freedom of press, you can't lie in the press, right? There are legal repercussions for slander and libel in the press. So I think the problem is a lot of we talk about censorship and freedom of the press and freedom of speech is we don't realize that like this is happening on Twitter this week. Trump last night or the other night said he won the election, and
Yeah.
Twitter's now putting out notices saying no, that's not true. He cannot announce that, and
Hmm.
calling people out on their stuff because for years we were letting that stuff slide, right? And the coronavirus is a perfect example. talking about drinking bleach, talking about whatever drug that doesn't really actually work, and like, doing all these
That's a
things.
big, big topic, man. This whole idea of censorship and freedom of speech, and it really needs to be looked at in such a nuanced way because there's so many factors to it. I mean,
Yeah.
it is. Do you agree that it's a slippery slope and that each thing needs to be looked at in a very sort of nuanced way, or are you? Do you have a pretty
So
clear opinion on this right now?
yeah, so here's what I think of this. Okay, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are private companies. You have no right to freedom of speech from a private company. You don't. I don't. You don't. Nobody does. Now, I'm not saying it's the way it should be, but the
Hmm.
reality is, if Twitter wants to shut you down, they can, right? And we don't have a publicly funded social network
Right.
from the government, so it's different. The government is not stopping you from saying terrible things or whatever freedom of speech you want. They're not stopping you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That you can right now, if you want to say something,
Right out in
right,
the street. Yeah.
no one's going to
Hmm.
stop you,
Right.
right? I think what we haven't learned about, and people still don't realize, is freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences,
Hmm.
right? There's consequences to your speech, even if people like or dislike your speech. So, people talk about cancel culture. I don't think cancel culture is a real thing, because all these people who quote unquote got canceled, they're still doing great. They're still making tons of money. They're still like very popular figures, right? And so I think, you know,
Yeah, but they were chastised and just destroyed in the public's eye.
maybe, but so what's the big deal? Like, you're already in the public eye. You get chastised and destroyed every single day. I mean, like,
It's a
no.
huge deal because
I,
it's mob mentality.
so first of all, you have to ask yourself, a lot of what gets said in the public media is already mob mentality, right?
Hmm.
It's there's groupthink happening, regardless or not, if you're looking at cancel culture, right? Perfect example is we as a community don't think you can go out and just start cussing, right? There's a group
Hmm.
thing involved in that, right? You don't go to work and just start cussing. You don't go and say and behave certain ways. There's already social kind of norms we agree to. And I think the difficult thing when people talk about political correctness is there's a lot of times political correctness what people mean is I want to be able to say racist things without any repercussion. That's what they really mean.
I don't think that's what they really mean. I think that's what some extremists do.
I don't think, but the problem is we know it's not an extremist because the president of the United States is a white supremacist, right? It's not extremists. It's like people who are
Mm.
every day, unfortunately, in America talking about these. And I mean, with what happened this summer with George Floyd was a perfect example. 50, 60 years, black people have been being killed by police.
Hmm.
Luckily, in 2020, with the amount of social awareness, and we actually have video, we're starting to finally believe some black people. We still don't believe all of them. There's so many police officers that get away with this. But
Hmm.
20 to 30 years ago, my black friends were telling me the same thing. Yeah, I get harassed by cops all the time. But because there was no video evidence and we didn't believe black people, we didn't think it was happening. Right. And so
Hmm.
it's not like the stuff wasn't happening. You don't think 30 years ago the cops weren't harassing black people? Oh yeah, they
So
were.
have you listened to Sam Harris's episode on Black Lives Matter and his
No, I have not.
breakdown of some of the stats? It's very, very interesting. But I think that oftentimes we make these assumptions that, for example, I mean, there's so many great things you're saying, and I wish I could go into
Yeah,
every single one of them.
yeah, yeah.
But I'll on this one just to make a note. These beliefs that we have that there's so much violence and even murders of the police toward black people. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to this that are very complicated. There is, first of all, the fact that white people are just as targeted. That
But that doesn't
even on a
excuse it.
percent,
That doesn't excuse it.
oh, it doesn't excuse anything for
Right.
anybody. Like that should never happen. But there's aspects to it. It's like, okay, did that person make a violent move and threaten the life of the police officer? Should the police officer allow that and allow his or her life to be taken? How many on a percentage basis in terms of the overall distribution of these people were white versus black? How many of those white people struck first versus the black people? And so on and so on and so on. And when you really sit down and you look at it, you actually end up finding that these examples of murder and extreme violence that are unjustified are like tiny, 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 minuscule level. And because of, to your point, our ability to now have this constant, magic screen that can teleport us to any situation anywhere in the world, we are given that vantage point of, holy shit, this is happening a lot.
There's a couple things to look at. Let's look at the police state in general. First of all, the police in America were formed from slave patrols. The first version of police in America were paid for by plantation owners to bring black slaves. That's literally why the police was created in America, and that was then instituted into official police forces. So even the history of policing in America is extremely racist. Two, whether or not the people that the police are harming are black or white, they're harming their own community, and
Mm-hmm.
that is a major problem. And then the simple question I always ask people is, do you feel safer when you see a cop or not?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I'll be honest, for most people, I don't think the answer is I feel safer, right? I think people feel fear when they see cops, right? Now, some people might feel safe, and that might mean, maybe they grew up in a community where the cops were treating them well. But if you grew up in a community where you see the cops harassing your community all the time, are you going to feel safe? I, for instance, do not feel safe when I see a cop. I don't, right? And often it's just like, am I speeding or not, right? Like that's probably one of the
Mm-hmm.
first things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Did I do something wrong? But I think for the vast majority of people, we're seeing right now, if you call a cop and you happen to be black or brown, there's a good chance that something bad is going to happen, right? And we know this. We see this all the time. I mean, perfect example is what happened in Kenosha, right? A 17-year-old white kid can walk around with a gun being supported by LEOs, while a 9-year-old, 10-year-old Tamir Rice gets
Mm-hmm.
executed by the police,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so these
Right.
differences are pretty obvious, right?
These examples are perfect for making the point, but also I think it's important to look at the perspective of the police officer, which I can't
Why?
speak to. Why
Why?
not?
Why?
Because then why
What's their
would I
job?
not?
What's their job? Their job is to protect us, right? So to put it this way, there's police officers in the rest of the world that do not kill their citizens. Why is
But
it
but why
okay?
are our police officers being killed?
Well,
Can we
one,
not look at that?
America is deeply gun friendly country, so that's probably the biggest part of it. Having
What do you
access to
mean?
weapons.
The citizens have guns, but also the police. Yeah, goes
Yes,
both
well, the
ways.
police is also have military level gear now, right? They have
Yeah.
some crazy ass gear. Um, and what I'm
But all I
saying though,
said was, can we look at the perspective of the police officer? And you're saying why we shouldn't because they just have one
why
job.
do we ask police officers? Why do we ask citizens to behave calm in the face of fear when police officers can't?
Police officers can't because again, I can't speak for the police officers,
Right,
but
right.
there is a culture within the police community that they have their own fear, Ketan. They
Oh,
have their own version
I
of
don't,
fear.
I don't
And I
think
think
the
that's why they're aggressive at times toward certain people and profiling can happen because there have been in situations where his buddy Bob either got shot or killed or just there was a violent moment from someone who's black or brown or yellow or white, and so
but
they
but
might
but
start to be a little bit fearful themselves and aggressive when they don't need to be. is
but
that is that
but
fair?
but every study has shown the bias that we have towards different people from the police eye is a very strong racist bias, right? Black people get worse sentences for the same crimes. They get worse violent outcomes for the same kind of police takedowns. It's these numbers come up over and
That's all
over.
true. But just to stick to that's definitely true. But to stick to the point of why they might behave that way, I'm saying that because there is a higher probability that a person that looks like that doesn't treat them the same.
No, they behave that way because we don't train our police officers. We see same
We
thing with the army and the police. We say we care about our forces. We actually don't take care of our forces. We don't. We pay money so they will attack people, but we don't pay them money for post-traumatic stress disorder. We don't pay money for veterans. We don't care if police officers who are actually really end up being hurt. Often have the police unions paying for them. And so the reality is, we say we want safety, but all we purchase is violence, right? If we
I
really want
agree
to,
that the training is absolutely not where it should be because with proper training, they would go through that scenario of getting attacked many times and be able to make a decision that's less instinctual and fear based And perhaps by going through that motion, the way, say, maybe not to an extreme example, but like a Marine does, there's
Right.
going to be a calm that comes in at that moment.
Well,
But it is a normal reaction. And especially if they're hearing from their community that there is fear within them and that there's a likelihood. I mean, that's what the data
but
shows.
the people
Like
who should be
black on police violence is much higher than white on police violence. And so
well,
there's a reason that they feel that way sometimes.
so the reality is police should be the most safest people in the country because they should have the best training to de-escalate situations. The big movements around defund the police is the reason why is right now our police handle every kind of situation. Cat stuck in a tree, police has to handle it. Someone trying to kill themselves, police has to handle it. A crime
Yep.
occurring, police has to handle it. So, a child being separated or hurt by their parent,
Right.
police has to handle it.
It's
We're
crazy.
asking. I do not envy police at all in the sense of what they have to handle. The problem is we only fund violence. We don't actually fund community solutions, right? When someone's having
So
mental,
should is that so? What should, I guess the question is, what should the role be? Obviously, there needs to be much better training, but what should their role be? Should it be for those things that you just listed out, or should it be more specialized?
well, a lot of what the defund police movements are talking about, Minneapolis is talking about, Seattle's talking about this, San Francisco is talking about this, is
Hmm.
funding programs and other organizations to handle the non what we would call criminal situations, right?
Hmm.
If someone is
Hmm.
feeling suicidal, you don't send a cop,
Right.
right?
We shouldn't. You're
It's a
saying,
mental
yeah.
health situation, right?
So
It's
then,
not.
should the police still be there for the violent things, and that should
Well,
be
here's
their
the thing:
role?
if we want to protect our police, that's good for them too, because
Hmm.
we can't ask a cop to any human to abdicate over millions of different safety situations. That's not no
Yeah.
one human can handle that, right? So we're at the same time we're saying we should feel safer around our police, but we're then giving them an impossible job to try to
Hmm.
make everyone feel safe, which is when they're not trained to do. And then we say, here's money for guns, here's money for tanks, here's military level riot gear equipment, but there's no training for you to de-escalate situations,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's like we're screwing them over, right?
I agree. This is the conversation that should be had, and this is the things that we should be doing. I I can't stand the phrase defund the police because it's so easy for the other side to destroy. When you say defund the police, that's why it's so easy for Trump to say, look at what they're doing. They're taking all your safety away from you. They want to take the police away from you. The cities are going to run crazy and you're going to get shot and you're going to get robbed. I think it was not thought out and it moved a little too fast. And
I want
obviously I can understand why.
I want to push back on that. Here's why: the people who have been saying defund the police, and didn't they just say it this year? They've been saying it for 20
Right.
plus years.
But it
They
accelerated. That's my
it,
point. It was an
it got more
exponential
visibility. It got more
acceleration. Yeah.
visibility. It got more prominence. There's a reason they say that because where you put your money is where you put your outcomes, right? So, like in San Francisco and LA, the most well-funded departments are the police departments,
Hmm.
right? Across America, police and army and military get more money than anything else, right? But things for like social safety nets, things for like healthcare, things for like taking care of our community, they don't get funded, right? And so what they're really saying is you put your money where your mouth is. So if you like America, unfortunately, with our prison system, it's in our incarceration system, we believe in punishment. We don't believe in rehabilitation, right?
Yep.
We're out
Hmm.
to punish people. We want to put people away in a jail that honestly makes it worse for us. We spend more money. Okay, put it this way. So America has more prisoners than any other country in the world.
Hmm.
Okay, and even more than like the Soviet Union back in the Gulag days, right? We have more black people in prison than were ever slaves,
Hmm.
right? And so the problem is we have created this culture. It's also a for-profit driven culture with prisons, where we basically disenfranchise people by saying, here, you live in your community, and we're going to have the police come in and attack you for small crimes that we wouldn't attack a white neighborhood. You're going to start getting a record. Then you go into juvie. Then you have to go to jail. There is a school to prison pipeline, right?
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
these people can't escape these lives. And after that, they can't vote because they're a felon. And so
Yeah.
there's all these things where basically we're saying, we're never going to let you actually be free, right?
Yeah.
Of course, those people are fucking mad and fearful of the police. If the police have come into your neighborhood and you saw them fucking with your friend and you saw them harassing you and you saw them treating you differently than they treat white neighborhoods, of course you're going to be pissed. I would be
Oh,
pissed,
couldn't agree with you more on this.
right?
Couldn't
So,
agree with you
so,
more.
so
Yeah.
again, I think the issue is not. I don't think out there that every cop is out there to hurt someone. I don't think so at all. I think cops have a really hard job, but I think the problem is cops
I'm
in the
saying that fear is two-way. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, but these are trained forces. Like you wouldn't expect a Navy SEAL to have a level of fear that the average person does because they're trained to handle it. And same thing for
But
cops.
we also just said they're not trained.
Well, that's
So
what I'm saying. But we should invest in that
they're not trained
training.
well enough. We
We
should
should
invest in
invest
the
in that in
training.
training.
But I'm saying this is like a rookie cop, and there's a reason for that
Why do
fear. The
rookie
same
cops
way
have
that there's,
guns?
yeah. Again, you're asking the right questions. I'm just saying, look at the present situation as it is, and it's important to understand that that fear might go both ways. And that's even if you look at conflict in the world, right? That's generally what it is. Each person has an ideology, and they have fear about the other. If you can
Okay,
break down that fear and show them that you actually fear the same thing, they begin to have empathy for the other. What I'm trying
let
to create is empathy for the other.
so let's talk about social innovation. Okay, 50 years ago, it was hard to imagine a person on the moon. It was hard to imagine this phone that could connect you to the entire world. But now this modern futuristic world is there. We live in a modern world that has all this amazing technology. We can't live in a world where we don't fear police, right?
Hmm.
Like other
Hmm.
countries don't fear their police. Other countries, like when you're in England and you see a cop, it's like a friendly thing. When you're in Japan, you see a cop, it's like a nice thing, right?
Hmm.
Like it's like, hey, how you doing? They're community, managers, their
Hmm.
community guidelines versus like holy shit, I'm scared because this cop might attack me, or I'm scared because I think I might have broken the law. I don't know why. Why are we paying our taxpayer money to create fear in our neighborhoods? That doesn't make any sense. We're literally saying I'm going to pay a large portion of my taxes so there's more fear in our community. That doesn't make sense. I don't like. Why would I pay to get scared?
America is a unique beast, man, and there's a lot of history here, going back to all the way to how it was founded.
Yeah.
And you made one point about the slave owners and the root of police force in the country, and I definitely understand that. But I think it's like where we suffer sometimes is we look to our neighbors or examples of what we like. And I really think that America is such a unique animal that we are going to have to struggle through this and create it in a way that works for us, because I don't think there's any example of any country out there that we can use as a model. We really are a unique
I don't.
animal,
I
and we
don't.
have
I
to
don't.
realize that.
I don't agree with that because, in lots of ways, like the rest of the world has solved gun violence. They have. Every other country has.
Guns are not going anywhere, though.
I'm not saying guns are going anywhere, but I'm
Right.
saying
So what do we
they've
do?
they've they've solved gun violence in lots of ways,
Yeah.
right? Right?
But they never were a country founded with the Second Amendment that allowed gun ownership.
But a perfect example is Sweden.
Hmm.
Okay, Sweden has the most gun ownership outside of America. Okay, it also has the best training for guns in the home in the world, right? You have to have a license for bullets. You have to have a license separately for your gun. You have to do
Hmm.
all this training. There's all these fines if you don't follow through, right? And the Sweden in general has a culture that embraces guns. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, why do we think that a country that can take someone to the moon, that country that can invent the internet, a country that can like unite 335 million people somehow can't solve gun violence? We're just going to throw our hands up at that? No, we're throwing our hands up there because we stop caring. We have said we're okay with kids dying. That's what we've said, right? So I don't believe that this problem is unique to America. I think the problem is that we think it's unique and we think that somehow we have to do something differently than the rest of the world has done. These problems, like healthcare is a perfect example. The rest of the world, developed world, has solved socialized healthcare.
Hmm.
Canada solved it. Europe has solved it. They figured it out. It's not genius. It's not rocket science, right?
Hmm.
Somehow America, the smartest and most wealthy country in the world, can't. No, it's because we don't want to. Our priorities aren't there, right?
When
So
you
I
say we don't want to, do you mean the group in opposition that's saying I don't agree, and we don't want to change gun laws, we don't want to change healthcare laws, we don't want to change these various examples you're making?
well, I think
Because
the
we
problem.
we don't see the reasoning enough, like kids dying, that's not a strong enough reason, because that's how it's coming off, you're saying.
Well, I think in America, wealth makes right often.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The wealthy have an outsized influence on our elections. They have an outsized influence on our media. Um, we literally have the most billionaires. There's 100 billionaires in the Bay Area alone.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bay Area is rife with homelessness. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Not at
San
all.
Francisco has more income inequality than Rwanda. That doesn't make sense to me at all. This
Mm-hmm.
is an extremely rich city, right? And so I think the problem is we have there's a comic where it's like this rich guy. There's 10 cookies. He takes 9 cookies, the rich guy, and he says to the white man, "The brown guy took your one cookie." This is in a nutshell what America is, right? It's divide and conquer by the wealthy, by those in power, to
So
pit us against each other.
the Republicans look at California and San Francisco and say these are democratically run places, and like they can't figure it out. Like they're looking at you saying, "What's going on, San Francisco?"
So yeah, that's a valid point. Here's what I'll say: there can be more democratic leaning places. It does not mean they've solved all the problems either,
Hmm.
right? And then the reality is what
San
we
Francisco
know.
is a very unique animal too. Silicon Valley's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we know the statistics that like the blue states support the red states tax wise, right? What California gives to the economy and to the US Treasury is more than it takes in.
Hmm.
And every red state by nature doesn't do that, right? Right? The red states end up costing us money, right? So I think the issue is very complicated. It's not a simple one to solve. And I think while you could have a democratic place like San Francisco in a lot of ways is run by rich people. It's run by landlords and who make it the NIMBY movement makes it hard to build real housing with density,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? They rather have expensive housing, right? Perfect example. Tokyo is a perfect example. Tokyo has built incredible amounts of housing. It's
Yeah.
affordable to live in Tokyo.
Well, San Francisco could have been the new Tokyo.
It could have been right.
Unfortunately, they
We
fucked it up.
chose we chose with Prop 13 and a bunch of other laws with the laws that limit the height, in the city to 5 stories,
Hmm. That's
right?
crazy.
It doesn't
Stupid.
make any sense, right? And
No,
and
it could have been the city of the future.
I don't think that's a liberal thing. I think that is what I would call a conservator of wealth thing, right?
But
And
that's
there's
tough
definitely
because it's such a democratic city. And so it's
it's
like,
so
why aren't they voting in favor of what these values you say that are important?
well. I would be the first to criticize the Democratic Party as well because it is affected by money as well. I don't think it's the same thing as
Yeah.
a right wing, but it's definitely affected by money, right?
Yeah.
It's not like Obama was free of criticism. Hell no,
Right.
right? I mean,
I,
he yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
hey,
want to
Rich,
get into some of this San Francisco and culture and a lot of things that
yeah,
you're in. But before I do, I want to take one step back and say we've talked about so many things that
yeah,
literally my brain was like, I would love to dive into each one of those. And one point I want to make is a lot of what we're talking about, I want to distinguish the differences between, and we've mentioned things like fascism, and we've mentioned things like these are on spectrums. And one thing that I really think is important for anybody is understanding where they're at in terms of their political compass. And
right,
they should check that out. I'll put that in the show notes for people. But this political compass is like, look, when you're looking at these things, oftentimes we're trying to put a person like a Trump or a Biden in a bucket, or a Bernie, and we're labeling them with these very clear box like ideologies. But there's more to it. Like Trump might be one thing economically than he is socially, and I think a lot of the times he actually might show up and do something economically or socially that's in the benefit of a person. Like we went through the abortion example, but then economically he might be against what an individual wants or needs to do. And the purpose of democracy, I think, really at its root is to vote your interests, right? Like that is the purpose of a vote. It's like what and who is going to represent me and my needs at that given point in time in my life to the best that I possibly can with the choices that I'm given. And the other thing that I think is very important that I just don't personally see enough of in California in particular is understanding other people on the other side. There's a really important aspect of this, Ketan, that I just think is insanely missing, especially in San Francisco. there's such a quick reaction to say these people are crazy, these people are racist, these people, I just don't get them. And over time, I have really tried to focus on putting myself in the shoes of, I did it with, I'm telling you about the police officer, the Republican, the racist, even the extremist, because, and even the extremist on the left. And I think those are very important things to do. Otherwise, what we actually end up doing, it's very ironic, it's
Yeah,
counterintuitive. We're actually
yeah.
creating separation and division by saying you're creating separation and division. And all it's doing is it's actually closing the door even more. I think it's very important to understand your so-called enemy or the person that shares different views than you know? And that's one of the points of this conversation is like you and I are not having the same view about many things, but it's important to try to understand where that's coming from.
Yeah, no, I hear you're saying. I want to point out one thing. There's a thing called the Democracy Index, and it's
Mhm.
pulled out written by this left wing bastion called the Economic, which is obviously very right wing. It ranks America as 25 in the world, and it calls it a flawed democracy. I
Mhm.
truly do believe in democracy. I believe everyone should get a chance to vote. But we have seen in this election, the past election, that there's a lot of gerrymandering. There is a
Oh yeah.
lot of money in politics that dictates who can run. America is not democratic by any means, sadly. I wish it was. But this is not just according to me. This is according to people who study these things, right?
Mhm.
Your point about this, whether or not we have enemies in the same country and understanding enemies. So, one, countries like Russia and China that want to see America fail, they want us to be divided. And there's plenty of data to show that in the last 25 years, we've become more and more divided, sure. But I would argue that we're actually a lot more similar than we think, right? Gun control is a perfect example. 80% of people agree on control. The NRA makes a lot of those things that we want, like gun registration and gun licensing, a lot harder because they're a minority that gets funded by the, like, literally Russian kleptocrats to prevent these things, right? But a lot of Americans agreed on a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
A lot of America agrees on socialized healthcare, right? People agree that we should not live in a racist situations, right? In a racist
Mhm.
world. People agree on those things. The problem is when you have organizations that can make you, like Fox News, that can create this divide and conquer methodology, it serves their interest because then you have someone else to fear. And
CNN is just as bad, bro. Just as bad. They are crazy.
so there's the bias index in media. I was
Uh-huh.
talking about with someone yesterday. Fox News is all the way on the right.
Yeah.
CNN is a little bit to the left. So I don't
Dude,
think
they used to be a pretty dependable outlet, actually. They really used to be as moderate as they could be, but it is drama central over there, man.
well.
It freaks
So
me out.
here are a couple things. One,
They
America,
they are not pro-Trump. Let's put it that way.
they're not pro Trump, but I don't think America
Okay.
even has a real left. Our policies on the left are considered center or center right in Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Europe does not
Mm-hmm.
argue about socialized healthcare. That's not a right or
Mm-hmm.
left wing thing, right? And I think the other thing about finding enemies in or having enemies in political discourse is this: if you want government to have less money involved, is different than you saying, I don't believe Black people should have the same rights. And this is where, what can we agree on? What can we disagree on? And we'll say, we can't disagree on homophobia. We can't disagree on transphobia. We can't disagree on racism. We can disagree on things like, hey, should we build 10-story buildings or 5-story buildings?
Do you
Right?
think that there are people that are disagreeing on things like that?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Are they even, do they
I mean,
matter?
Trump's
Like,
a perfect example. I mean, he is an avowed white supremacist.
have you seen the videos where Trump disavows all those things and he talks positively about every race and his support of those races?
I, I
Those
think,
things don't get
again,
shown on CNN.
look at what they do, not what they say.
There is
Okay,
an aspect of that, yeah,
right? Like the Trump
but
is
it
the perfect
has to be
example.
like, what's an example? Yeah, for
The
you.
perfect example is the Central Park Five. Trump was arguing for 5 children to get killed, even when they were proved innocent. Five
I don't
black
know
children.
this one.
The
Yeah,
Central
I
Park
don't
Five
know.
is a big issue. This is before he was president. This was when he living in New York. He put an
Hmm.
ad out, a full page ad out in the New York Times condemning the Central Park Five.
Have you looked at the explanation on the other side?
What explanation is there to there's
That's
5
the
kids who were
problem,
proven
Ketan.
innocent?
That's the problem. That's what I don't allow myself to do anymore. If you can't look at the explanation on the other side, then you're not looking at it.
But if we're
You're
looking
really
at a
not looking at it.
racially charged situation where there's no
Everything has an explanation. It deserves the
and some
opportunity to be
explanations,
explained.
some no, not everything. Well,
Does everything deserve the opportunity to be explained? I didn't say you have to accept it.
I would
If we
disagree. I would
stop and
disagree on
we
that. Here's why.
so then we're not actually being logical about and rational about how we look at the situation. If I do something and you cancel me and I don't have the opportunity to even explain my perspective of what I meant or what
Right.
my intention was, or really maybe even I got screwed and it was all a lie, but you don't take the time to at least hear me, then we didn't fully look at the whole situation.
This is a discussion about equality versus equity.
I think it's a discussion about truth from the way I'm looking at it. I want to look
Sure.
at it from a perspective of
So
truth.
this is, I think, the meat of what we're trying to get to. Okay. So, um, saying that you are a Nazi is something that's actually legal in America.
Hmm.
Okay. In Germany, it's not. In Germany, they literally have made it illegal to have Nazi paraphernalia, to espouse Nazi views because of their
Hmm.
history.
Yeah,
You think
yeah.
Germany is a very safe and free country, right? Now, the question is, do people have the right to think the way they do about being a Nazi? They might get that right in their own world, but they don't get that right to espouse it to the rest of the world. I'm sorry, there's certain things.
I'm actually driving at something slightly different. If I can pivot it,
Okay,
it's
okay.
like let's just think of an example where Trump or an individual is there's an example you made of like I wish I knew exactly what that story was, but let's look at like a different Trump example
Okay,
of
okay.
something that he is accused of or an individual is accused of. And I said, do they have the right to at least, should we look at the explanation of that person or people that support that person and give a different perspective on it? And what we're saying is that that thing that they did, that we believe that they did or see that they did, and I couldn't see it any less clearly, is so clearly racist or bigoted or whatever, that there's no explanation for this and there's no conversation. And the point I'm driving at is that there's always an explanation from that person's perspective. And after taking it in, it's like a form of justice. After taking in both sides, then the decision should be made about what that really means.
So that goes my question: Do Nazis get a say?
I don't know. That's such an extreme example.
But racism is a very similar example. Racism is a perfect example. Trump has a history of saying and doing very, very racist things. It's a documented issue. His father has a history of that with his housing policies as being a slum
Mm-hmm,
landlord
mm-hmm.
in New York.
Yeah,
So
like an example is when he said, the Mexicans sending their rapists. Okay,
that's a very clear example.
so in that example, I believe that there is a way to actually look. The guy isn't eloquent. He does not use his words properly. He makes very brash, blanket like statements. There is a way to actually look at that and perhaps understand what he meant. He actually, if let's just say it was Obama saying it, there is a way where Obama would have said it and it wouldn't have triggered everybody because he wouldn't have just came out and said rapists, sending their not so good people. There is a point there, and the point actually is that we don't want to just open up our borders and allow people who might have a criminal history, like someone who might have actually raped a woman, to come into the country. There's a way to say that. Unfortunately, he's absolutely awful at speaking and getting his point
Well,
across in a
also
way
not
that
also
doesn't get
that
him.
he's a liar because one, immigrants, whether illegal or not, are
Mhm.
hundreds of times safer than American citizens. They commit less crimes. Every data point shows this, right? This
Yeah,
is
he's not speaking
xenophobic.
in that kind of a nuanced
This
way,
is
though.
xenophobic
Yeah.
fear mongering, right? This is no different than 100 years ago we were saying the Chinese were terrible, or the Mexicans were terrible, or the Irish were terrible at one point, or the Jews were terrible at one point, right? This is xenophobic fear mongering, right? Why should that get a voice? This is not like a new thing to the world, right? This is First of all, I don't believe Trump is ineloquent. I believe he knows exactly what he's doing. He's probably the most media savvy leader in history.
Yeah, for sure,
Okay.
for sure,
Right. He
for
knows
sure.
how to get a rise out of people. He knows how to change the dynamic when he needs to change dynamic. He knows how to get attention away from things that should have attention. So I don't believe he's stupid in any way. I believe that he is manipulated really well. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Second of all, why do we excuse racist behavior as somehow a mistake when there's a history of it happening repeatedly, right?
Mm-hmm.
If one time someone says something that could be like, oh, hey, yeah, that was maybe we want to rethink that, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
it's hundreds of times, you don't need to necessarily then give that same voice anymore. Trump, one, he's been proven to have, was it like something like 20,000 lies he said during the term of his presidency, more lies than any other human probably ever said, right? And these are
Mm-hmm.
documented
Mm-hmm.
things. These are not things where like he said a lie and no one heard him. Like these are on
I
record.
think it's incredibly important as the leader of any community, especially this country, to be very careful what you say, because that obviously was said to get a rise out of his base, to get a rise out of people in general, and to perpetuate that fear mongering that you're talking about. I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more with that. But what I'm really driving at is the importance of looking at everything objectively as much as possible and not allowing the history to have a say in the present moment.
But this is
Meaning, if we're going to look at an example of him being racist, we should give a fair shot at finding examples of him not being racist
but
and then evaluate.
but this is how justice works. Okay. If you are a criminal and you've never committed a crime before, the judge is going to treat you differently than if you committed 20 crimes before. That's just what happens, right? So why does Trump not get affected by the same things? I'm not saying people shouldn't have, people are innocent until proven guilty. Sure, yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's a core belief that I 100% believe in. But this is not the first time that this person's saying this. This is not the second. It's not the 100th. It's the 1,000th. So why are we
Mm-hmm.
still giving someone the benefit of the doubt? We see the media doing all the time. They'll say he misspoke. He falsely claimed. The
Well,
man's
he's
a
got the
liar.
power, man. If
The
he
man's.
drops out, which it looks like he's about to lose,
I
he's
hope
about to
so.
get railed. He's about to
I
get
hope so.
railed.
But here's I think what the problem is with this equality versus equity discussion. Not everything deserves equal consideration. I know that in libertarian mindsets, I know that in pure philosophical discussions, we think as a notion everything should get equal treatment. But I actually don't think that's true. Okay. Racist and violent statements that are set out to hurt other people do not need the benefit of a soapbox. They do not need to be considered with the same thing. This is why you can't yell fire in a theater. This is why in
Mm-hmm.
Germany you cannot espouse Nazi propaganda, right?
Who
Because we know.
determines these rules, and do you think that it can be a slippery slope?
I mean, everyone's always worried about the slippery slope. We're already long past slippery slope because black people are
Then
being
isn't that?
killed and put in prison by the millions, right? We've gone past the slippery slope of racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're way past that. I think often when you are used to privilege, equality seems like oppression. And this is what's
Equality of outcome or opportunity.
in either way. What I'm saying is that for the long time, rich people and white people in America have been in power.
Mm-hmm.
That's a variable fact. That's our. I mean, in our Constitution, only white men, the originality could vote, right? So this is like a thing that was legally done, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's changed now legally, but not in effect always. Um, we have always said that things are going to be unfair. America is a deeply unfair place, right? Well, now, for the first time, or not the first time, a larger portion of people are trying to hold people accountable. And
Mm-hmm.
these people who've never been held accountable are now being like, wait, why are you holding me accountable? Dude, motherfucker, it's not that you're being held accountable. You just got away with it for years. You got away with it for years, right? We had
Mm-hmm.
racist leaders in America for years, and now they're being held accountable. We had sexist leaders for years.
Mm-hmm.
Weinstein is a perfect example. Everyone knew what he was doing. He got away with it. It's not that he was attacked.
I
He
don't
was
think
being
anybody really, any sane person, has an issue with providing an equal playing field of opportunity. And I think, as you said, the vote has changed to where now legally there are protections and there are ways in which we can make sure that people have that. But unfortunately, the way that plays out always isn't fair. The hiring manager, and just to shift into what you
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
as the founder of Hire Club, you not only coach people individually in the workplace and in the hot spot of the world, but and going for the best, biggest, highest paying jobs in the world, but you run a community that is all about educating how to do this. And you see this every single day. And I don't think that there's anybody out there who would say that they don't want to see equality of that opportunity. But here's where things get really sticky. You're saying, and I mentioned the slippery slope to explain what I mean by the slippery slope is if you begin to force that outcome in order to create that level playing field, that's happening. First of all, I'm not stopping it. It's not going to stop. It's already happening. It's too late. It's happening in corporate companies. It's happening at startups. It's going to happen. We have this many people in the world. Proportionally, we need this many women, this many black, this many gay, whatever it is. That's happening. So my question is, or rather, it's a fear. I have a fear that those who set the rules will have the rules set on them without even knowing. Those that think they are doing the right thing are in fear of doing the wrong thing. It is a huge thing to unpack. But the main danger is the equality of outcome, the forcing, using a measure of actual force to make something happen in the name of social justice is very dangerous. And history shows that.
What
History shows
people
that very clearly.
what people have been scared of with cancel culture and political correctness is them being held accountable for saying racist and sexist things. That's what they're afraid of.
I don't think so.
I think so. I think
I don't
so.
think so.
That's
They're
I mean
afraid
there's
of not being innocent until proven guilty. And they're afraid of, by the way, you can say that until you're on the other side. Because here's a fact, and here's something that I'm sure you are also aware of. People are scared. Even those that are trying to be good are afraid that they're going to do or say the wrong thing. Ketan, it is fully possible that you will fuck up tomorrow and that
so
you
let
will
me
be punished and held, air quote, accountable for your behavior or what you said when you, with every intent, didn't know that there's a new rule that you can't say that thing. And so that's why I'm saying, where's the rule coming from?
let me make it really clear. I do mess up all the time. I was in a conversation the other day. Someone pointed out to me that I wasn't being listening and I was interrupting the black woman who was speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I had to do a lot of thinking about what was happening. I reached out to her. I apologized. We created a discussion about it, and there's work I have to do. And I don't think anyone's free of that work. I'm not free of that work. I get called out all the time, right? I think the
Mm-hmm.
problem that people run into is the calling out is not the issue. That's how you learn. When a kid makes a mistake, you call them out, you teach
That's a
them,
great example. Yep.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's what
I
other people exist for.
Yeah, yeah. I am not worried about me making a mistake. I'm not. What I'm worried about is me not having the maturity to realize when I'm being held accountable, when I need to maybe adjust what I'm saying or doing or listen to people more. Perfect example, you and I, as men, have a different experience in life than women do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I used to ask women, when I would ask women to go on a date, I would say, let's go take a walk. And I'd say, let's go take a walk in a public place down by the water, right? Embarcadero, very safe area. I recently met some women who are like, I don't feel safe doing that. You're asking me to take a walk with someone I don't know. Even if it's a public area, people can get attacked in public areas. And for me, as someone who's never had to fear for my safety on a date, that was like, what are you talking about? That feels really safe. What are you talking about? But it was not my safety that was in question. It was the woman's safety that was in question. Now, that's not that they didn't feel safe around me,
Mm-hmm.
but what they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to say is they have a different experience than I do. And I could never understand an experience. I have a daughter. To this day, I still don't understand her experience as a woman, right?
Yes.
Right. She's 21 now, so she's an adult. But us as men, for years, have not realized what women go through. We're starting to finally go through that. We're learning the safety and the fear that women have in their lives, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I know you care about this, and I care about this, and these are learning points for me still, right? I would have never thought to say a walk on a date or a hike on a date is a dangerous thing. But
No, this is a great example. This is perfect. But aren't there a lot of people picking and choosing their sensitivities now and virtue signaling? Like everybody is
but why?
now
So, hold
has a
on.
new thing that they are offended about. And so what that creates is I'm just going to constantly walk around holding people accountable.
Well,
And okay, fine. I love what you said. That's very mature. You're like, I am not in fear of being held accountable. That is an adjustment to my character. I need to learn to be sensitive to others. But that sensitivity that that other person is pushing on you to adjust your behavior, there's two things I'm saying. One is they're picking and choosing the things that they want to be sensitive about that maybe are not about their individual experience, but are rather about the identity that they feel that they fall into. It might be um, a sexual identity. It might be a skin color. It might be whatever, right? That's one. And the second aspect of it is what is left that is safe to do or say if
so I
this
think what this
continues.
we're getting to is, I think one of the reasons we started this conversation, because there was a post in the Higher Club about a brown woman who had an interview
There's a lot of
experience.
great posts like this that are great examples.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she had pointed out that she felt that the one white male in the interview process was unprepared and didn't treat her fairly,
Hmm.
right? And this created a huge amount of response because some people were saying, why are you calling him out because he was a white man? And other people were saying, a lot of
I'm
women were
surprised
saying,
anyone said that. Yeah.
but a lot of women were also saying, I hear you.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example. You and I have different experiences, men. We do.
Hmm.
We just do. And me working as a career coach, I see the issues that women deal with every single day, right? I hear from them the the not only the glass ceiling, but the gaslighting and manipulation of their worries. The problem is when you come from either feeling the effects of sexism or racism, you always view every situation as, is this person being a dick to me because they're sexist or because they're a dick, right?
Hmm.
And now there's not always an easy answer to that. There isn't, right? But your experience teaches you that certain kind of people, when they do this behavior, are probably being sexist or racist, right?
Hmm.
And for a lot of people, a lot of brown and black women, often comes out from white men, right? They're saying white men treat them like this, other men don't, or just general men treat them like this, right? This is based on their experience. Now, I am not one to invalidate someone else's experience. Now, you're concerned about, do we get into this group think? Do we get into this fear? We have spent thousands of years listening to men and men being in power. And I think what's happening is, for the first time, one, women own more financial power now in the world.
Hmm.
Two, women are more educated than men are on average now, right? And three, they're tired of this shit. And you and I shouldn't be the ones talking about this. We should definitely have a
Hmm.
guest on here that can speak more to this, a woman on that can speak more to this. But as men, it is our time to listen. We've been talking way too long. And what's happening, especially as a man, as someone who's had partners, as a father, as someone who has family members, I've realized my impact in all of this. And I have not always been a good listener. I
Hmm.
still sometimes have to catch myself or get called out for being like, yo, you're mansplaining or you're interrupting, you're not letting me finish. And because I've had that power as a man my entire life, right? Right. And if I can understand this from the aspect of what men and women go through, I think other people can try to think of that
Are we
with other.
talking about in the workplace or just in society in general?
I think,
We see it mostly in the workplace in
well, no,
power
I think
dynamics,
we
right?
see it everywhere, but in the workplace, I think people are now starting to feel more empowered
Yeah.
to talk about these things,
Yeah.
right? Women are now starting to feel more empowered to call out what they're seeing
The
as.
issue with that example and some of the examples I've seen are it's reverse racism. That's really
Yeah,
what's
yeah, yeah, I
going
knew you were
on.
talking about this. Okay, so let's agree on definitions first of all. Okay,
Sure.
all right. Merriam-Webster, as of 2020, defines racism as systemic racism. What it means is that the situations in power, the effects of the policies, are labeled and focused against particular races or genders, right?
But I, as an individual, can also be racist.
Well, so
Right.
What I'm defining
Like
racism as,
another, yeah.
and this might be a hard thing for people to hear. White people cannot experience racism. Men cannot experience sexism because the control and the power and the systems in play in America and most of the world are to our advantage,
Okay,
to
but
men's advantage.
here's how maybe they can. If
Well,
I
hold on,
look at
let me finish this. Give me 1 second, because I want to give a clarity here. That is a definition of racism. Prejudice, anyone can feel. Okay. So prejudice, that you might be in a situation where as a man, you feel like you got singled out for whatever reason, right? You as a brown man got singled out for whatever reason, right? Prejudice is different than racism, because racism is systemic. What Black Americans go through is not the same what white Americans go through,
okay.
right? Right. The average wealth of the Black community, the average of education, and it impacts what happens. Like, I was reading this great article about economic outcomes. We were talking about outcomes. A PhD educated Black person has less wealth financially than a non-high school graduate white person. Okay. So these outcomes are severely racist, right? And they're
And that
impacted
is
by,
an assumption that it's built into the system. Yes.
it's not even an assumption. I mean, there's lots of data to back that up. But the issue
Right.
is this: what often naturally we feel as racism is often us feeling prejudice, right?
Yes.
So like that comment, particularly that was happening in Higher Club, where some people were feeling like the woman was,
If he, as the middle-aged white man, was indeed being that way, we would say that is racist. But she, in response, you could say, was being prejudiced.
she could be being prejudiced.
Could
She
have
could
been.
be. She could have.
Yeah.
But if her experience is every time she goes to interview, this happens, is that prejudice? Right? And because we all know there's a white ceiling in America, in corporate America. We know that, right? I mean, Google this year has less diversity in their hiring than they did last year in 2020,
It's
2019.
complicated, man. It's a really complicated statement. And the reason I say that is because it's an assumption that the racism or the prejudice is built into the system, that there's a disadvantage for not being
But that's
that
not
white man. That's an
an
assumption.
assumption. There's
The
every bit of
data
what you
does
should.
support it. Yes, the data
Yeah.
does support it. But the question isn't, does the data support it? The question is, why is it happening? And once you unpack why it's happening, then you would say, well, it's happening because of systematic racism. And another person might say, it's happening because of a multitude of factors that affect success in the workplace. One of those might be aggressiveness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, personality traits. They could be behavior traits. It could be a lot of things that affect. It could be your negotiation ability, which I know you help people with. I'm just saying it's easy to throw a blanket and say this is systematic racism versus saying the data might support, but what is really going on, and what really leads to success in the workplace and more pay and more respect and better titles.
So I don't think it's that complicated, because I think, one, there's enough people who've experienced these things that these are well documented things, right? Women get paid less. Women, so like when I do salary negotiations, I'll give you a perfect example. In hiring, there's this thing called leveling. A lot of corporations have it. So leveling means what pay range you're going to be in. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Often when I have women clients who are going through salary negotiation with the same education as a male client, they'll
Mm-hmm.
get a level 3 versus a level 4.
And I have a theory as to why that is not related to sexism.
I mean, sure, but in my 300 plus salary negotiations I've done,
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen it explained otherwise, other than sexism.
Well, when you help a woman negotiate her salary and she gets more, does she end up getting it? Like she
Often she either ends up getting it or goes to another organization that's going to respect her as a woman.
right. And when a woman, we're using the example of a woman, we're saying like less pay, okay, and that's very well documented in the data that women are paid less. But in those situations where you or I've done this for many of my female friends, have helped that woman negotiate that salary by being more demanding and less agreeable, they get it. The reason it is, if I can just slightly unpack
Yeah,
this, is
yeah.
because from a personality perspective, again, gender and sex is complicated too these days. From a personality perspective, women are more agreeable than men, meaning that they're going to be more flexible, more go with the flow, and less demanding of their individual needs and more accommodating to the other person. So you, I hope, can admit that you've seen that men generally move up the hierarchy a little more easily and get what they want because they're a little bit more competitive. And this is also data. The same way that there's data that there's more pay going to men, there's data that shows that men are, and that's only on agreeableness. Women are more conscientious, they're more hardworking and more organized, but unfortunately they're not as demanding and competitive in the workplace.
So
And when
there's
you have an environment that is set up hierarchically, like where there is a hierarchy and your job is to compete and be as strong as the people next to you and kind of fuck them up to climb up the ladder, if you don't, you sort of end up losing, and you don't get the pay and you don't get the titles.
so there are obviously differences in the way we view a confident man versus a confident woman. A confident man is called a leader. A confident woman is called bossy, right? We see this happen
Yes.
all the time, right? There are, even when women exhibit the same leadership traits that men do, they're often being held to different standards, right? This
Yes.
happens all the time. And the one thing I'll say is what I learned about accommodation in women recently is women get taught to accommodate out of safety. Because if a woman, as she's growing up, has to speak up at certain situations, her safety might be in danger. Men have full freedom to speak up because we're never worried about our safety, right?
Yes.
Right. But women in social situations oftentimes don't speak up because there might be a worry of their safety. Now, I'm totally not speaking for myself here. This is based on my experience talking to my clients and talking to people in my life, women in my life. So I don't. We definitely need to get someone, a woman on here talking about these things. But from what I've seen, the way women negotiate is not because they're not confident.
Hmm.
It's not because they don't aren't as hardworking or they aren't as smart, any of that.
Yeah,
It's
not
that
at all.
we live in a culture where women are taught to be accommodating. And they're taught to be accommodating for lots of reasons. One, somehow that's like the platonic ideal of a woman who's like, being a caretaker, which is some
And
weird
and
bullshit.
you're saying what I'm saying, which is that that shows in these personality assessments that women are more agreeable. So I'm not defending the way it is. I'm
Right.
explaining the way it is. Does
But
that make
what I'm saying
sense?
is just because they're taught that doesn't mean that what they're taught is correct.
Correct.
Right.
We're kind of talking about two different things. You're going more to the root, and I
Right.
love that. And you're saying
Right.
it should be different. I agree with that. But I am saying that the reason that something is happening is not the reason of a systematic flaw.
Oh no, no, it's 100% systematic though. It is 100% systematic because what happens is we view people who are different than the status quo as somehow less educated or less, less likely to be a good leader. I mean, these perceptions, these biases are very, very like deep in lots of ways, and we have all of us have a hard time fighting these biases, right?
Hmm.
And in the work I do, I hear all the time how hard people are working and they're not getting recognized for their success, right? And so, there used to be this thought process where I think we always thought, there's A players and B players and C players. We have now in Hire Club coached over like 2,000 people. Okay. I have never met a lazy person yet. I have never met someone who doesn't work hard, not once. I think there's a myth created around if you disenfranchise someone by saying they're lazy, by saying they are not being as aggressive, by saying they're being a different way, then it's easy to say the outcomes they get are okay because that's based on what they did. That's not what happens. No, right? What happens is we get taught societally what's okay, what's not okay. Women as leaders get called bossy and bitchy. Men as leaders get called confident and aggressive. And we
Yeah.
view men as aggressive as a good thing. We view women as aggressive as a bad thing. And it's like these really messed up things, right?
Yeah.
And what's even worse though is the data shows female employees and female leaders actually do better for the bottom line.
Hmm.
There's a ton of data
Hmm.
that show diverse and inclusive hiring practices actually make you more money, right? Right? There's a ton of data that show that. So I think the problem is these biases are very deep seated. Everyone has these biases, right? And I don't think here's something I'll say, and then this is maybe a hard thing to talk about. I think there's very few humans that are free of bias. I am not free of bias, right? Bias is an innate thing. we as humans are tribal in nature,
Hmm.
right? There's some studies showing that we can identify race within 100 milliseconds, right? It's like a super fast brain response. It's based on how we survived as tribes, thousands of years ago. So I understand why bias occurs, but we are also can be an educated populace. We can learn what that bias is and where that bias comes from, and we can get training on that. We can get bias training. We can get sensitivity training, and I have had to do it both through classes and through just the work that I do, because we don't realize, you know, perfect example, video interviewing. Okay,
Hmm.
right? In interviews, people judge your background in video interviews on whether
Yeah.
they think you're a good hire or not. They
Mine's
judge.
shitty.
Well, yours is pretty good, Arman. Yours
Oh, we
is
just
great.
moved.
But like the quality of the vocals, the quality
Right.
of the video, right? We make thousands of judgments on people all the time,
It's true.
right? And I'm not saying that the judgment is an issue, because that's a human thing. I'm saying the
Hmm.
awareness and the willingness to be aware is an issue. If you're not willing to be aware of your own biases, then you are part of the problem, right? And if you're
Hmm.
someone around saying I don't have a bias, that's the bullshit. Everyone has a bias, right? It's just human nature, right? We have to do work. We have to educate ourselves, and I think the realms in which we have to educate ourselves now, which is a struggle that I think modern America deals with. For the most part, we have done the science work on healthcare. We have done the science work on climate change. We have done the science work on going into space. We have understood and done a lot of things. The science around understanding humans, the science around communication is very subjective still. There's not as much objective. I'm sure there's people
Hmm.
working on it, but there's not enough science. There's not enough research done on what can we do to educate ourselves and to evolve ourselves past what are very easy to understand biases,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like, we have to get trained, and the problem is some people think they don't have bias, right? The whole thing of I don't see color. We now know I don't see color is actually in fact a racist statement, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
We didn't think that 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, people say I don't see color. We were viewed as, oh, you're being fair, right? Right? No, now we know that's actually not being fair, right? So what's happening is the social awareness is increasing over time. And as you get Black and brown people and women and more diverse voices, trans voices, gay voices, speaking up and showing you their experience, right? Immigrant experience, all of that, we're now getting to see what those other experiences are like, right?
Hmm.
And we've now got to hear them. And the problem is when we hear things that are different, right? There's a lot of studies talking about humans have a hard time changing their minds, right? We get stuck in
Hmm.
our ways. And I think the hard thing is, and this is why I think the modern generations are doing a lot better than the old generations, it's very hard to change your mind as you grow older,
Yeah.
right? Kids these days are crazy aware, right? Like when you and I were kids, let's be honest, saying someone was gay was something you could do as a joke, right?
Yeah.
Like people would say gay, they
Yeah.
would say fag, and I'm not condoning any of those things, but I
No,
did
that's
that.
just
We
the
did that as
culture
a
we
kid.
grew up in.
It was a
Yeah.
culture we grew up in. We now know that's not okay, right?
Yeah.
No kid would say that now, right? Same thing is happening with lots of other social things, right? The
Hmm.
level of social awareness, like my daughter's social awareness is like miles above where I was in high school,
Right.
right? And
Right.
every generation hopefully is being more and more aware of the differences in other people's lives, right?
That is
And I
definitely
think
happening.
this is where the fight happens, because you have this older generation that is not willing to change their mind, that grew up in a certain way, that grew up in this bootstraps mentality, that grew up in this like kind of like, oh, everyone should figure it out on their own kind of way. And we have this other generation, let's be honest, Gen Z and future generations, they got handed a pretty shitty hand. Okay. The climate's shit, jobs are shit, right? The country is like up in disarray. Of
Hmm.
course they're having issues,
Hmm.
right? Right? Like
Hmm.
they didn't like Gen X, we grew up in an environment where like things felt relatively safe,
Yeah.
right? And now they're growing up in an environment. My daughter's generation is the first generation that makes less money than their parents.
Mm.
That's never happened in America.
Hmm.
This generation is the first generation that owns less housing than the previous generation. That's never happened in America, right? So I think what we're seeing is now you have the combination. You used to have this kind of what's it called, the prosperity gospel,
Yeah.
Gospel prosperity America, it ruled America. We're now seeing how that's false. There is not a prosperity gospel. It is actually not real. America's now, there's less social mobility. There's less social economic mobility than ever has been. And so these future generations are starting to ask why.
Yeah.
Say why is this happening? Why am I being paid less?
Well, that's exactly where I am happy is that these discussions happen. There's one thing that I think is slightly dangerous, and that the generation sort of begins to evolve to think and push the same way and say this is a battle of the new generation versus the old generation. What I'd like to see is more debate within the generation, like that there are multiple ways of evolving and moving forward. Unfortunately, I think we are moving forward in a very clear direction, and it's a huge wave of energy in terms of the changes that are being enacted. And we can sit and argue about which ones are good and which ones are bad. And I hope we do, because
Yeah,
that is the only way for society to correct itself as we go forward and not repeat mistakes of the past. I think it's easy to think that all the changes that are coming are positive, and it's easy to say that all that's happening is that the old way, the status quo, is getting in the way of the new way. But really, the discussion and debate should be happening amongst the young people that are actually making that change, amongst even people like you and I. This is a perfect example of the type of conversation that needs to happen where, yes, I come into this conversation with my biases and so do you, but there has to be, and there is, I can see a willingness to understand the other person and say, well, what is it possible that I could adjust within my thinking? Because unfortunately a lot of people do not have the ability to do that. I know everyone's heard that 1,000 times. It's like, be open-minded, don't have these set beliefs, but it's very difficult to
yeah,
actually do.
yeah,
Just to I want to work toward wrapping up here because this has been an
yeah,
awesome discussion, but I'm really curious, as someone in your position, when it comes to success in the workplace, defined as money and status, which is the main things people typically want, and fulfillment now is a huge thing with people in work. They actually want to
yeah.
feel fulfilled and that there's meaning. What are the go-to sort of habits, tips, things that you really think, mindset that you think a person needs to have in 2020 going into 2021, the most chaotic time that anyone can recall?
Yeah.
How can we be more successful? What would you
That's a
say?
good question. That's a good question. I would say in 2020, first and foremost is self-care.
Hmm.
There's a lot of data to show that for every negative thing you hear, you have to hear 5 positive things to combat that. And in 2020, we're hearing negative things left and right.
Yeah.
And so what I view as self-care is taking care of your body, taking care of your mental health, getting a therapist, eating well, getting outside for exercise, right? Like just basic taking care of your
Hmm.
needs, taking a bath if you need to, whatever. Self-care is taking care of your health, right? To be successful, you have to have your Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, right? It's really hard to succeed when you're not being taken care of, right? If your health is impacted or things like that, right? Stress makes it really hard to be successful,
Hmm.
right? The second of all is resiliency,
Mm.
right? There's tons of data to also show that when you don't give up at the right kind of effort, that it does pay off.
Hmm.
And 2020, we are all about resiliency, right? We've survived some terrible, terrible things. We're surviving Trump. We're surviving coronavirus. We're surviving racial injustice. Uh,
Hmm.
and we're trying to do our best to survive all that. And resiliency, I think, is a really important thing to work on. So, what I tell people now, it's not about whether you did good or not. It's about how hard you worked. Did you keep trying, right? And did you try new things, right? So yeah, self care, resiliency.
I
I
love that.
think the other thing to define success, okay, is the ability to learn and change your mind.
Hmm.
Often, yes, we do get in our own
Oh,
way.
Jesus. Have I changed my mind in so many ways, just even in the last 1 year, 2 years? Yeah, it's
Exactly.
crazy. Yeah,
So
on
we
everything.
often get stuck in our own thinking. I
We do.
have, as a founder, I face this all the time. I didn't want to do certain things, or I thought this was the right way. And honestly, a youthful mind, a A plastic mind, a mind that can change, is a mind that can grow,
Mm.
right? It's really hard to grow if you're static. It's really hard to grow if you're locked in one way of thinking, right? And we talk about this a lot in coaching. We talk about perspective shifting. We talk about assumptions that we make. And when I see a lot of people get stuck in their growth, is they think certain things are a certain way, and they're only going to be that way, or they're only going to ever play out in this manner.
Right.
And that is a problem of stagnant thinking, right? And this has nothing to do with what situation you're in your life. Everyone can feel these things, right? Whether you're successful or not, you can feel that way. So I think being able to learn and change is a super important skill in 2020. The ability to say, like, hey, I was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
That
probably could learn.
accountability.
Yeah, it's not just accountability, but just like
Yeah.
it's kind of humbleness too,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
like I think we often think success is because we did certain things. Often success is we just got lucky too, right? We just happen to be in the right place, the right time, with the right opportunities in front of us, right? But hard work does play off. But the other thing is, luck happens when you have an open mind,
Mm.
right? When you're able to see
See it.
opportunities,
Yeah.
you can take advantage of them. And what often happens when you are in a negative mindset, you're not having your health taken care of, you're in a stressful situation like the job search, or having not a lot of money, or feeling scared for your health. That fear makes it so you don't see opportunity,
Yes.
right? So I think so. And fear is natural. I'm not saying fear can be a very healthy emotion. I wrote about fear the other day. And I think that what we run into is we let fear guide us. And
Mm.
the issue we'll see in 2020, fear turns into anxiety. I have lots of anxiety, and what
Yeah.
happens is we let that anxiety guide us instead of our hope,
Mm.
right? So if you combine resiliency, if you combine the ability to grow and learn, you combine self-care, you combine all of that, and you find a way to love yourself, I think success will show up to you however you need it to. It might not
Mm-hmm.
be monetary success. It might not be status success. It might not be meaning success, right? Success can show up in different ways, right? But I do think we often think the end result is the value, is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I've learned in 2020 is that the journey is the value. How you behave on the way to where you're trying to get to, how you take care of yourself and others on where you're trying to get to, is actually much more important than where you're trying to get to.
Mm. Beautiful. Beautiful, man. Spoken like a poem. Ketan, what is the best way that people can support you and Hire Club and even get some help in these crazy
Yeah.
times?
Yeah. So we're at hireclub.com, HIRECLUB.com.
Got that
We
dot
offer,
com.
yep. We offer career coaching and counseling. So if you want to increase your salary, if you're looking for a job, if you're stuck, if you're trying to become a better manager, if you're a founder and you want support, we offer career coaching to help you succeed. You can reach us on there.
Hmm.
We also have a Facebook group called Hire Club, where it's a community of 33,000. And you were one of the early members of that community.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of people talk about the different issues at work and different issues that they're facing because of work. And it's also a community that supports each other, right? And
Yes.
so I think, we're always happy to help. I love supporting people. I love helping people succeed in their careers. And we have a team of over 80 coaches. It's not just me,
Hmm.
that can help you succeed in your career, right? And we are seeing incredible successes. So yesterday we announced one of our clients got a $75,000 raise. Today I got a client a
Perfect.
$25,000 raise.
Wow.
And last week alone, we've accumulated over 160K of raises for our clients. And so what we're doing works. And I truly believe the real diversity is economic diversity, right? It's like, it's hard to say you
Hmm.
found success for someone, but it's really easy to say you get the more money, right? Like that's success, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I really believe in economic diversity as a powerful force for change. And so we're here to help people succeed in their careers. And I love doing it.
Well, and I have to give a personal, I have plenty of listeners that absolutely need to jump into Hire Club, whether it be getting coaching or just starting with the Facebook group. Like you said, I was one of the early people in there. I've watched it grow. It's an amazing community. The conversation's very vulnerable, very honest, very truthful. There's a lot of support. People bring up all kinds of issues. And I think as a person who, and I would actually say from both perspectives, if you also run a company, you're an entrepreneur, or
Hiring.
you're hiring. hired a few people for different projects and different companies, I think, from
Nice.
Hire Club for sure.
Very good.
So definitely recommend to the founders to also jump in, and anyone on the job hunt, even if you're not looking right now. It's just a great, great community to be in. And I'll include links to everything in the show notes for people.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ketan. Thank you. I respect you. I appreciate you, brother. This has been an awesome discussion. One of the
Good
longer
catching up,
ones, but there
man.
was a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah, we got deep. It's always
We
good to
got
see you,
deep.
man.
Yes, bro. There it is. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for tuning in. This was a really fun one. I learned a lot. I shared a lot. And there was so much more I wanted to say, but I also wanted to make sure Ketan had the space to really process out his beliefs so that you could also get a different perspective as well. Hope you enjoyed this one. Really curious what you think. Let me know by shooting me a DM on Instagram. Just slide in. And until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.